All right, Geometry 2-7, Part 3. Here we go. Let's try to get this last proof done. Given x is the midpoint of segment SY. Z is the midpoint of segment YF. Also, XY equals YZ. Okay, we are being asked to prove that ZF, segment ZF, is congruent to segment SX. So we're going to have a little diagram to draw over here, and it is going to be kind of like a flat V, and we've got these points along here. These is S on the left, X, and then Y at the bottom, Z, and then F on the right. Okay, now we know that XY is the same distance as YZ. Okay, and we know that X is the midpoint of SY, and we know that Z is the midpoint of YF. All right, and we're trying to prove that ZF, this segment here, is excuse me, congruent to SX here. Okay, so I'm going to write this, and our T-table deal are statements and our reasons, and I'm going to go over the plan before we get started here. So, so the first thing we're supposed to do when we do a proof is think of a plan. So some of the other ones we've done have been a little bit complicated, and it's kind of hard to talk about what the plan is going to be. But this one, I feel like we can talk about the plan here first. I want to know that ZF is congruent to SX. That's what I want to prove. And I know that XY and YZ are congruent. So I know that these two guys are congruent. I haven't said that they're congruent yet, but it says equals here. So that means the distance between XY and YZ is the same. And so I'm going to be able to say that these are congruent. Now, if X is the midpoint of SY, then that means that SX and XY, these two segments, are equal, because X is in between, exactly in half, right in the middle of SY. So that means this segment and this segment are equal. Same thing over here, YF, if Z is the midpoint of YF, that means that YZ and ZF are congruent. So that means that this segment and this segment are congruent, and this segment and this segment are congruent. Now, I know that XY and YZ are congruent. So if these two segments are congruent, then these two segments are going to be also congruent, because these are all congruent to one another. So let's see if we can write this out, and hopefully it makes sense. So there's a lot of given here, and I'm just going to write given. You should be writing all of that down here, but I'm not going to for the sake of time. This is already the third piece of this video. So now I'm going to say that these two segments are congruent. Segment SX and XY are congruent. And I'm also going to say that these two segments are congruent, YZ and ZF. And it's by the same, I say them both at the same time because it's by the same definition that I can say that. And it's the definition of the midpoint. The definition of midpoint is that the midpoint cuts the segment in half. And so it leaves two equal segments, on one on each side. Now I can say that Sx is congruent to YZ, but I should first say that XZ, or XY, is congruent to YZ, because I have there that the distances are the same, but not that the segments are congruent. So this would be definition of congruence. Now we're all talking the same language here. We're talking about congruence instead of distance. So now I can say that Sx, since Sx and xy are equal, and I know that xy and yz are congruent, I shouldn't say equal, I should say congruent, I can say now by the transitive property that Sx is congruent to YZ. Sx is congruent, segment Sx is congruent to segment YZ. Is that what I'm trying to say? Sx, yes. YZ. Got ahead of myself. Segment Sx is congruent to segment YZ. Transitive property of congruence. And I can say Sx is congruent to ZF by the transitive property. And so now I can say, Zx and Yz are congruent, or Sx and Zf are congruent by the transitive property. And so therefore, Sx is congruent to Zf. Now, see how I've written Sx is congruent to Zf, but I want to prove that Zf is congruent to Sx. So I want these to be switched. So Zf congruence is congruent to segment Sx. So I just switched those two. And that is the symmetric property of congruence. And that is the 2-7. Sorry it ended up being in 3 parts, but it actually might be a little bit easier to go through it in 3 parts. I don't know. Anyway, good luck on the homework.